Hello, everyone. I'm Jean-Claude Beyond Mystic, and welcome to today's edition of Beyond the Vault. This is your weekly updates with Mr. Andy Scheckman. You can find his work at milesfranklin.com. Andy, welcome back to the show. All right, man.
Good to see you, my friend. Good to see you, brother. I'm good. How about you?
Doing well, back in shape, back on the on the
You're
circuit,
always
so
in
to
shape,
speak.
man. You're always handsome. You always look good, brother. You're a
Thanks.
lady killer.
I have my hat here today because I was working outside this morning, removing some snow,
Yeah, I'll
and
make you feel better. I'll make you feel better. There you
there you
go.
go. What does yours say there? Miles Franklin. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
mine's a little. Yeah, mine's a
We need
little.
we need some of those with triple digit silvers on it.
Yeah, there it is, right there.
There you go. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here today. Lots of stuff going on actually since last week, so I'm going to bring up a few of those news items. But first, I wanted to have Andy your take on this whole situation with New York, the decision that was just brought down against Mr. Trump, and now perhaps the beginnings of what we could describe as a civil war if indeed the truckers stop or start boycotting New York and stop bringing in food and whatever else they need there in that city. Does that go anywhere from here? Do you think that has legs? Where do we stand with all that?
I mean, it's really, you know, you don't want to see a civil war. You don't want to see that type of lack of unity in this country, but I understand it. Enough is enough already. You know, when you look at the judge who is ruling over all this, he was a contributor to, I think it was Fannie Willis's campaign. I mean, the whole thing just stinks to high hell. And I think there's a good portion of people who's just fed up with it. And that's part of the problem, is that this is not lost on only half of the country. It's not lost on half of the world either. And then people see this country and say, what the hell's happened to the judicial system, where they can just go and get this leading presidential candidate mired in nothing but frivolous legal battles that he'll end up winning the majority of. And you know, like, for example, let me just put it to you this way. I live in a house about, you've been in my house, and I live 40 minutes away from Mar-a-Lago, like, just talking about the way things are with this whole thing.
Yeah.
And I know they're different cases, but you know, you look at Mar-a-Lago, there are houses in my neighborhood here that are 6,000-7,000 square feet that are selling for $7-8 million. And they want to value Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, which, I'm not joking, man. The houses on Palm Beach Island, the houses are $50 million, $60 million, $70 million. You have Sylvester Stallone just bought a house there for I don't know how many tens of millions of dollars. They're the nicest, craziest, most beautiful homes you've ever seen in your life.
Yep.
And they want to say this is only worth 18 million. And to throw this lawsuit upon him when the banks are saying, no, we have no problem with Mr. Trump. We would like to do more work with him. There are no victims. There's no standing on any of this stuff. And I find it to be pathetic. So, you know, maybe that's really what this country needs, is a wake-up call. And I'm not advocating violence or a civil war, but for God's sakes already, it's like, I think a lot of people have forgotten what this country is all about, what it stands for, what our roots are, what our history is. And if they can do it to him, $1 trillion worth of income or of business has left New York. And if anyone had half a brain, aside from the highest tax rates in the country, they'd get the hell out of there so fast. It's the way the rest of the world views the U.S. and their sanctions. You end up on the wrong side of an agenda, and they're going to get you. If they can get a guy like Trump, a former president, you know, what does it mean for the rest of the businessmen and women in this world?
Well, that's what businessman Kevin O'Leary was teaching CNN here in this particular interview about this particular case, and how basically, well, it's a victimless crime, but everybody's doing this. But it's sending a message across the bow to say, well, you know, maybe you're not safe in New York, and people are already deciding to maybe leave.
Well, that's right. And what he says in there is really the whole crux of it. He says, look, I don't care if you're in a contract. He's like, people don't understand contractual business. If you're in a contract and I say my property is worth this, well, the other side of the contract has to come and do an appraisal and say, I'm not quite sure about that. Why do you think you have to have an appraisal done
Right.
by the mortgage company that's going to lend you money, right? Because they're going to come in there and say, well, we think it's really not worth that much. Or why do you think you have to have the insurance company come and take a look at the house before they insure it?
Yeah.
Because you have to, both sides have to agree. And this whole thing is really, it's a whole lot bigger than just going after. It's bigger than going after Trump. It's an erosion of everything that this country stands for. The rule of law, Lady Liberty, blindfolded with the scales of justice. People have traveled across the globe and risked their lives, as I said, tied together inner tubes from Cuba or walked from Central America to find justice, to escape authoritarianism, to have a better life. And I find this kind of stuff far more distressing and troubling than anything else that's happening economically, because it is the undoing of this country.
Right.
What makes people want to come to this country and invest in this country is the rule of law, is equality, is justice. And what is happening is pathetic and embarrassing and humiliating if you're a proud American. And I think that's what this trucker movement is all about. Right. I know they're trying to get to him. The guy that was running it just stepped down. Maybe they did get to him. I don't know.
He says they didn't, and that he's not afraid of shit or something like that. But
JC, I don't know, brother, man. I just liked it better when this country. Yeah. It's like leaving Minnesota. I was so proud to be from Minnesota, and I woke up one day and said, "Where the hell am I? I got to get the hell out."
You're right.
And I'm not saying that about the United States, because I'm a patriot and I'm doing all I can to let people know what's happening. But it's really bad, JC. It's really, really sad. And
well, I'm not carrying Trump's water in any sense, and we can go look at the merits of the case. But when you start to see the pattern of the last couple of years of all the frivolous lawsuits that he seems to be winning over and over again, it's describing this basically a state of lawfare. So they're using all the laws to attack their political opponents. And that's going to be the title of the show here at 3 p.m. today, guys. If you want to join us, instead of doing the 8 p.m. Beyond the News tonight, we're doing it at 3 p.m. So if you want to join us for that, that's going to be on Rumble. Going back to just very quickly to put an end on this too, like there's the law and then there's what actually happens. I'll give you an example. And this is what Kevin O'Leary was saying too. It's like, well, no, that's kind of how business is done. And the banks were more than happy to continue doing business with Mr. Trump, even in the context that's been described in this particular case. But here in Canada, for example, there's a law where if you're a gun owner in Canada, when you store your guns, you have to put those little trigger locks on them, right? Otherwise, it's not you can be charged with not storing a firearm properly. Most Canadians don't have trigger locks on their guns in their houses. But if you say something against Mr. Trudeau, maybe somebody would come up and, witch hunt you for something that they wouldn't charge anybody else for. This seems to be the case here for Mr. Trump in this particular case, where he's being targeted with something that most of the times nobody even looks at. And if they had to adjudicate this, they would have thousands and thousands of cases, just like here in Canada. If they wanted to stop you for that type of crime, it wouldn't end, and it would completely overwhelm the judicial system. So back to your point, when they want to get you,
there's a time and a place for a trigger lock, but not at home protection gun. That's about as dumb as a mud wall. As you're trying to unlock the trigger, as you're shaking, as your alarm's going off, it's about the same thing as going after a former president in the midst of an election who's destroying the entire field and a victimless crime, and the banks that are involved with this saying we have no problem with him. We want to do more business with him. The whole thing stinks to high hell. And the fact that there's not outrage and people, have to separate their partisanship here. And this is not about Trump. This is not about red or blue. It does not matter what side of the aisle you are on. I mean, what goes around comes around. And if you don't think that the Republicans are stupid too, they'll do the same thing. And we are just trashing everything good that this country stood for, in particular, the Constitution and the rule of law, and due process and all of this stuff. It's really quite horrific.
Well, we're at the end of the empire. We're seeing it crumble now, and we're seeing, of course, all the signs of it. Let's talk about silver for a second. You sent me this clip here today. Of course, you're talking about this arbitrage opportunity.
Yeah.
It's getting worse and worse. Just a couple of months ago, we were at a dollar difference here between the Chinese price, a spot price, versus the American, the LBMA, and the COMEX. Why are we starting to see this? Where are we going? Are they incrementally, as we kind of presumed last week, taking over the controls, and they're showing us who's actually making the rules here in terms of price determination? Where we go from here, Andy, with this arbitrage? And does this start to hit the mark of waking up everybody else that we have a real problem here? At some
Yeah,
point,
and
there's a
that's
percentage
why.
where people wake up, right?
Yeah, it is. And this is a prime reason why I think silver exhibits the most asymmetrical risk reward I have ever seen in my career for any asset class, for any investment. Asymmetrical risk reward means what can I invest in that has the lowest downside and the best upside? On one hand, you see all of the exchanges being bled dry. You see India importing 400 million ounces in 2 years. You see 5.5 million ounces of silver delivered off of COMEX last week. You see the largest deliveries off the Shanghai Gold Exchange ever last week. You're seeing constant bleeding of the exchanges. And then you see China willing to pay almost a $3 premium to the Western spot price for silver. And you're going to see this arbitrage continue to go higher and higher and higher incrementally, enough to where the sophisticated investors who have access to both markets will take advantage of it. And it's a very big deal. This is kind of what I mean about seeing the forest for the trees. Forget what the Western price is. We're being lied to on everything in the West, whether we're talking about what's happening with Trump. In a form, they're lying to us about what the Constitution really is and what this country stands for, down to the metrics of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, down to the value of silver and gold, or all the commodities traded on the exchanges, because silver and gold are not just commodities. They are, in essence, the kryptonite to the system. And there are a lot of reasons why I believe silver might be the most undervalued, potentially best performing asset on the planet with the lowest downside risk. There are lots of reasons I feel that way, but it's just another example of slowly turning up the heat. And, the average person on the street, they have no idea what silver is. They have no idea that how much, has been accumulated by the central banks around the world. They have no idea that the Chinese are arbitraging it. They have no idea that these pieces are moving in a direction, but they'll wake up at one moment to the desire or the need, the perception that I need some silver. And at that stage of the game, it's far too late. That's when things get crazy. But when you see China doing this, arbitraging it by almost $3, that you need to wake up and understand this is foreshadowing of what is coming. And quite frankly, it should be a lot higher. And the only reason that they don't turn it up higher than that would be because it would get too much attention. And they're doing things methodically, but very covertly.
Right.
And, this is why when people say they're playing chess and we're playing checkers, they are. Because everyone says, why not just make it $50 an ounce and they'll get it all? No, they wouldn't, because then it would wake everyone up to wait a second.
It would be a deluge of competitors trying to get their hands on it also.
Correct.
Let me ask you this, though. You just mentioned the sophisticated buyers who have access to both markets. They're seeing now this arbitrage opportunity. Have you seen in the last couple of months, as the spread continues to widen, more and more of these investors now realizing that there is this arbitrage opportunity?
Well, if you look at the
ahead.
export numbers out of Switzerland are at all-time highs. And so it's not just silver, they're doing it in gold. So what happens is Switzerland is known as the refining hub of the world. So lots of gold and silver will end up in Switzerland. It will be refined, and almost all of it is going eastward, most of it to China.
Yeah.
And when you see, it's interesting too, when you see COMEX has delivered 350 million ounces of silver off the exchange in the last 2 years, and India's imported 400 million ounces in the last 2 years. Do you think there's any, one of the things that we talked about, I think I brought up with you last week, but it bears mentioning again, how many people even understand that the London Metals Exchange was bought by the Chinese a few years ago? Right. And how many people understand that the LBMA, which is owned by the Chinese, now is going to start pricing and listing Shanghai contracts? Okay, so it's going to be listed on the LBMA. The price is almost, well, what, over 10, almost 12, 15% higher in China, in Shanghai, than it is in London. So you can buy the contract in London and deliver it in Shanghai. And guess what they're doing now? They're actually going to start warehousing the LBMA metals in China. Do you see this progression?
Yeah.
Little by little by little, then bang, you wake up and where the hell did all the gold and silver go? And, you know, it's not just gold and silver. It's aluminum, it's zinc, it's copper, it's soft commodities, soybeans and wheat, it's hard commodities. And I mean, it's everything.
Let's talk about gold for a second. Citibank just said here, this is on CNBC News, that gold at $3,000 and oil at 100 by 2025. Let's not rule it out. What's this article really about here? What are they alluding to? Are they letting the cat out of the bag slowly here for investors in North America?
Well, to me, if you read that article, and it caught my attention really quickly, obviously, you know, look, you got the head of Citibank, number one. And when you talk about cartel banks, when you talk about those that will be around after the dust settles, they're one of them, as far as I'm concerned. In fact, if you look at a lot of the patents that are out there, like by Bill Gates, in terms of digital ID 2020 and all his payment systems, a scary shit if you look at it. And Nomi Prince did a great job about it, but talking about it. But Citibank is one of the ones that is there along with JP Morgan. But when you hear them talk about 3,000 gold, to me, what I found, he gives 3 or 4 different reasons why this will happen. But what I found most interesting, and again, it fits what I've been talking about, so probably that's why I found it interesting. He says the most likely wild card path to $3,000 per ounce gold is a rapid acceleration of an existing but slow-moving trend, de-dollarization across emerging markets, central banks, that in turn leads to a crisis of confidence in the U.S. dollar. So what he's basically saying is that he says central banks, if they sharply ramp up purchases of the yellow metal, well, they have been. They bought more over the last 3 years than any time in history. Yeah. So basically, here's the crux of everything that I really just want to focus on for just a minute, because I'm guilty of it too, JC. A lot of people have focused, maybe in myself, too much on the issuance of a common settlement currency. And James Rickards said it would come. The Russian finance minister, Sergei Glazyev, he said it would come. It will come at some point. There will be a common settlement currency pegged to commodities. Most likely what? Gold. Why? The only other tier 1 reserve asset in the world. Who's buying it all? The Eastern Central Banks. Okay, we've got that part down. But at the same time they're buying treasuries at a record pace, they are gold at a record pace. They are selling treasuries. In fact, China used to have close to 3 trillion in treasuries. They have 700 or 800 billion right now. It's the lowest number they've had in almost 2 decades. But, you know, Russia's sold all of theirs. Saudi Arabia is selling them. Japan is selling them. They're all selling treasuries. But why? So they're selling treasuries and they're buying gold. And we'll talk about the treasury market right there in a moment to prove that they're selling treasuries. But what they're basically doing, as far as I'm concerned, is all of this trade all of these deals are being settled outside the dollar. We'll talk a little bit about that later too, I'm sure, about the deals that are being struck right now with barter between these countries, but they're not settling in dollars. And that's why I say it's like a butter knife hitting an oak tree. Over time. It will take time, but you'll start to make a dent. And that's what's happening. They are making a dent on the settlement status of the dollar. But when we talk about what makes the dollar the petrodollar, it's yes, OPEC and Saudi Arabia are going to value oil in dollars globally, but they take the reserves, the excess, and put it into treasuries, which really is the crux here, because it enables us to live beyond our means and by the good graces of these foreign creditors who will invest in treasuries, right? Well, they're not doing that anymore. In fact, they're selling them. They're not reinvesting, and they're buying gold because go back to 2000, for 24 years, the S&P 500 has averaged 7%, and the bond market well under half of that. And the price of gold 7.8%. It's outpaced everything with no counterparty liability, no counterparty risk, no sanctioning liability, no coercion liability, no interest rate and inflation liability, all of that stuff, and it's in your own possession. So they're saying, what the hell do we need to hold U.S. government debt for in a country that's lost their flipping mind, that's inflating the shit out of the currency? And for the first time in 45 years, the treasuries that are supposedly so stable are more volatile than gold. And that's what they're doing. Selling treasuries, you can see that by the 20-year tail there. We'll talk about that in a second, and buying gold. And that's why we don't have to really focus on the settlement currency yet, because the act of all of this stuff settling not in dollars, and then all of the excess not going into treasuries but into gold, will have a very, very profound effect over time. That's that little by little by little by little, that all at once moment on the dollar. Now, as far as what this is saying here, this is exactly supporting what I'm saying here. When the government sells debt, they have an auction. I guess you'd say they say to everyone, all right, who wants to buy our debt? And the people who want to borrow at a certain interest rate, they start there. Okay, great, you're filled. And as they continue to go, other people say, well, no, thank you. It's not. I don't want to buy it at that rate. So they continue to raise the rates. Okay, how about this rate? How about this rate? How about this rate? And finally they say, okay, I'll lend, but only at a higher rate. So, I'll take that rate. And then when all of the lenders are lined up for the auction, and they get it all figured out, well, some here, some here, some here, some here. At the end of it, it's important to understand that everyone does end up getting the same rate. It's the rate of the last person that the government borrows from. So some say, I'll buy it at 4.25%, but no one else wants to buy it there. The next batch are at 4.6%. Okay, everyone gets 4.6%. The larger the tail, the worse the auction. And it signals a weak demand and a lack of faith in the government and in the fiscal situation and the lack of liquidity in the financial system. This is a record bad auction for the 20-year, the worst ever for the 20-year, the demand for the 20-year treasury. And so the bottom line is the government wanted to borrow a bunch of money at a lower rate than they were able to, and the higher rate they had to pay is really very ominous. It should be screaming at you that there is trouble ahead. It should be yelling at us all. But this is exactly what I'm saying. The banks, the central banks of the world who used to buy our debt, and central bank debt has this big of a slice of history as being considered an asset. Right. So that I don't want your debt anymore. Fuck it. I'd rather have gold, because look, you're going to sanction us. There's far too much risk if we're not on your side. You're going to freeze our assets. In fact, in the case of what they want to do now, they want to confiscate $300 billion from Russia. Right. That risk, that is having substantial consequences. And I don't know if as Bill Holter says, is it too stupid to be stupid? Is this intended? Or are they just that moronic that they think that by doing these actions that they won't have profound effects? My feeling has been consistent. There will never be a country in the Southern Hemisphere to ever trust us again if we continue to do these things. We probably have already crossed that line. But when you see no demand for the 20-year treasury, it just fits like a hand in glove. And I don't know anyone who'd be moronic enough to take that type of duration from the U.S. government at all. But I think it's an ominous sign. There used to be well oversubscribed auctions in all of our debt, not anymore. And instead, they're looking to gold and to settling their trade in local currencies. It is the beginning of the end for the Western hegemony. We still are the supreme system. We have supremacy. We have no more hegemony. And I will tell you that the supremacy is something that is sliding little by little. It's sliding away.
Yeah. I'm just going to bring up this article here based on what you just said. International lawyers approve confiscation of frozen Russian central bank assets in favor of Ukraine here. Again, to Andy's point, Putin mentioned that also in the interview with Tucker Carlson, saying, hey, the de-dollarization was happening before this, and now you're cutting your nose off despite your face. And we're seeing more and more international trade being done outside of the US dollar. Going back to this point, though, let me just bring up a comment from the screen. This whole thing about treasury bonds, it's a rich man's game. Yeah, to some extent. But
I don't think so.
But here's the thing. but let me go down there. Yes, to some extent. But this idea of the government having to raise rates here in order to entice investors is going to have huge ramifications to the guy on the street. Explain that, how it's no longer a rich man's game. It's an every man's game here moving forward.
Yeah, it is, because that's exactly right. Well, the 10-year treasury, I mean, as rates go higher to attract more, if you have to keep raising rates to attract people to buy your debt, well, everything is based off the 10-year treasury, credit cards and mortgages and everything. It just becomes a very big problem. It is the financing of our debt that has allowed us to live the way that we do. When you have 150 trillion in unfunded liabilities and a $34 trillion debt, who the hell is going to pay for it all? We have $8 trillion worth of 2-year treasuries that are come due this year. Who's going to pay for all of this stuff? We have 12 million people who entered this country illegally who need housing and food and schooling. Who's going to pay for this all? Who? Ask yourself that. We have a demographic that's getting older. And then you got someone in your comments there that says, well, we have all this gold at Fort Knox at $42.22 an ounce. Why is everyone worried? Really? Well, Fort Knox hasn't been audited since 1956. And every time Ron Paul said, let's audit it, he was vetoed. Why? Why, if it belongs to the U.S. public? Right. Why? So, I mean, there's a fine line between conspiracy and reality, a very fine line. And
going back to the comment of hurting the man on the streets, Nutty Beaver has a good comment also here. He says, there is a point where treasuries pay too much interest and then the money leaves the stock market, right? Risk to make 6%, no risk to make 5%. More to that point, if you have a pension fund and your pension fund is invested in stocks, you are also going to hurt here. This is the point. It is all tied in together, not just your credit cards and your cost of borrowing for your mortgage. Go ahead, Andy.
Well, no, yeah, I mean, it's all related. And I will tell you that almost all of the manipulation that we see centers around interest rate manipulation. But, yes, that's true. You will see people, and I think there's something to be said for, even though when you look at the CPI, which is a lie, your real return is negative, earning 5%. Look, 5% is not so horrible when you take the risk of the market out. When you look at the way that the stock market is performing right now, it's at all-time highs, but the breadth is going this way and the market's going that way. And every single time you've seen that in history, where you have, in this case, 7 stocks supporting the entire market, it has always ended poorly. Always. There's never been a time when it hasn't. And then you look at all the billionaires selling their stocks. They know what's coming. They front run. The big money always front runs. They're getting out while everyone is jumping in. And you can't have that small of a scope of stocks holding up. Look at the Russell 2000. The majority of them are getting hammered. The small caps, the businesses that are supporting the United States are getting hammered. And NVIDIA, everyone's so crazy about it. It's a South Korean company. It's not even a U.S. company. And when you talk about the economy, it is completely detached from Wall Street. So it's a big problem. So there's something to be said for going into very short-term duration treasuries at 5%, 6-month treasuries. And quite frankly, I understand that. I own some myself, but anyone who would start to go out in duration to past 2 years, I think needs to have their head examined. And with all of the risk associated with this administration, this country, this debt, this system, I think it's crazy. So yeah, there are things to worry about.
Yeah. We talked about.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. There's a little bit of lag.
Okay.
Go ahead. Okay. We talked about how the control mechanisms for the pricing of gold and silver is moving east. Let's focus now on oil and the petrodollar itself. We've lost that leg. You and I have been talking about this here in the last couple of years with Saudi Arabia making a deal with Russia. We're seeing more and more of the countries in the BRICS now trading international trade here, settlements outside of the petrodollar again. And more moves are being set. Here, Iran announces 700 million Persian Gulf Bridge project here funded by oil barter. Explain that too, how this is just one more nail in the coffin here, removing whatever is left behind the demand for the U.S. dollar.
Well, remember, everything settled in dollars, which created this synthetic demand. Everything. So everyone has dollars because everything really settles in dollars. All of these commodities, all of these trade deals have always settled in dollars because it was the most sought after currency. It was the most liquid currency. Everyone had it to buy oil. So it became the dominant world reserve currency, right? Well, last year, and then we talk about how when they left the BRICS meeting in Johannesburg, the deal was we're going to send our finance ministers back to the drawing board. We're going to admit a whole slew of other countries in Russia in October, 35 more have formally applied on top of the 10 that are in. And we're going to task them with coming back to present their findings on a common settlement currency. But until then, we'll do deals with each other's local currencies. But if you go back a year ago, China won a deal with Iran for a $1.2 billion renovation of their biggest airport to be settled in barter, in oil. Iran will pay China for oil, and the Chinese company will come and renovate and modernize their airport. Last week, Iran announced a $20 billion high-speed train network, which is going to be funded through the National Development Fund and oil barter agreements. And then you look at this one, $700 million Persian Gulf Bridge project, all being funded with barter. We're going to give you oil, and you'll come and do all of the work for us. All of that stuff used to settle in dollars, chipping away at the hegemony, chip, 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 chip. And now they don't take any of these proceeds that they would otherwise have and put it into treasuries. They're buying gold, and they're buying oil, and they're buying commodities, and they are building their infrastructure. This is why this is a slow-moving, methodical, base-building endeavor. And once everything is in place, it will be incredibly difficult for the West to disrupt it. Until then, the West has the ability to disrupt, and they do that. You saw what they did with, the pipeline in under the ocean that they blew up and admitted they blew up more or less. And they can disrupt, right? They're powerful. We're powerful. But these countries are very shrewd, and they're starting to do things that are going to make it very difficult, I think, for the West to stand up to once everything is fully in place, including, as they say in crypto speak, mass adoption. And when you look at all of the countries that are joining on, all of them resource rich, all of them strategic shipping lanes, all of them finding that safety together, it's really real. And then you look back to all the shit happening in the US and say, oh my God, well, you don't look at the US the same way anymore. So it's a lot easier to say this is the time to do it if you're those countries. Right. And that's why part of me has felt for a very long time that this is all being orchestrated for this controlled demolition, they call it, where you screw the pooch on both sides of the pond, over there with the way we handle our affairs, and over here with the way we handle our affairs. And people say, well, probably time to make a change. Thanks for the last 50 years.
Right.
And that's where we go.
You just mentioned the repercussions on the U.S. here. Let's just look at two articles from earlier this week. This initial jobless claims plunge near record lows here. The feds are questioning actually the data's accuracy. Well, no shit. The BLS, the Bureau of Lying Statistics, and this one here too, supermarket scramble. Food spending's share of disposable income hits highest level in 3 decades.
Well, the common denominator in both of those is that the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is the organization that tells us unemployment and inflation, and that's how the Fed is supposed to react. So you got the Fed saying, really, Biden administration, are you sure about that? Let's first talk about about the unemployment numbers. So as I mentioned last time, they quietly, first of all, they make a huge deal. If you watch all these idiots on CNN, well, Biden, the Bidenomics is working. Look at the unemployment numbers. Look at the unemployment numbers in 2023. They were incredible. But what they didn't mention, of course, which is just the journalistic integrity is just pathetic, is that quietly the first week in January, they downgrade those 2023 numbers by 440,000 jobs, or 40%. Oops. But no one talks about that. And then they give you all of these big 353,000 jobs that came in almost exactly the amount, or just below the amount that they took off the list. Well, they had all of those out in January, and a lot of those are seasonally adjusted part-time retail jobs for the holidays, and make a big deal about it. But at the same time, you have massive layoffs, corporate layoffs, full-paying jobs with benefits, like 20,000 employees out of Citigroup and 12,000 out of UPS, and and on and on and on. And that list that they have in there, it's huge. So you got full-time, high-paying jobs being shed, huge mass layoffs, and people taking 2 or 3 part-time jobs to fill the gap. And that's what they're calling all of these jobs. It's pathetic. And even the Fed is saying, you're full of shit. But then you talk about inflation, the CPI, which should be the CPI coming out of the BLS, take the L out, should be the BS. They exclude food, energy, and housing. Yet what they're saying here is food is the highest priced it's been for 30 years in terms of a percentage of income. And they also said something really interesting in that article that they go back as far as you want. And once food inflates, it almost never comes back down. It's very sticky, as they call it. Right. So the things that we need, insurance, live down here in Florida and watch what happens to your homeowner's insurance. It's through the roof. It's ridiculous. Yeah. Tuition around, look at college tuition, food, energy, housing, all of the things that we need. Well, geez, food, energy, and housing are not part of the CPI. And you know what else?
It's funny, when I studied economics back in the 90s, those were included in the basket to calculate your inflation.
Well, yeah, I like to eat and I got to drive and I don't like freezing my ass off or roasting. So you need energy. But you know what else isn't included in there? And it should be, ironically. What do you think, just as a guess, and it's probably even more so in Canada, is the largest line item expense for people our age, working class Americans, and it's not in there. It's not in there at all. What do you think the largest expense is to us working age Americans? It's a kind of a trick question. Do you know?
No.
Taxes.
Oh, okay.
And our taxes keep going up.
Right.
So if you're paying all this money in taxes and they keep going up, and you have a federal government addicted to spending, well, how do you get that? Well, you tax more, I guess. If you can't, squeeze blood out of the turnip, you tax. Well, that's not in there either. And so when we talk about what is coming out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics in an election year, we're being lied to. And that's the worst part about all of this. That's why all of us feel like we're banging our head against the wall when we talk to our best girlfriend Julie and our best friend Mike and Uncle Bob and say, well, you guys are all out of your damn mind. Or why my wife says to me when we go to Thanksgiving dinner, not a damn word out of you this time. Not a word, man. I don't want to get into a fight again because these people like my sister, who's one of the smartest people I know. She's very well read. She reads the wrong shit constantly. And I just have given up having economic conversations with her. It's, I love you, you're my sister, and that's where it ends, because half of this country has no idea at all. I said to my sister a few weeks ago, can you believe all of the Chinese males, military age males coming through the border? It's crazy. She's like, I haven't seen any of that. What are you talking about? Well, she doesn't watch anything or read anything that would tell her that. It's just the deprived and poor and downtrodden people from Central America in search of a better life. Sure, I'm sure there's some people there, but tell me, how the hell you got people coming from Syria and from Kazakhstan and from China? How the hell are they getting here? They're not walking from Central America and they're not swimming across the ocean to get here. And these are the things where you have half of the country or more completely oblivious to what's happening. This is where problems arise. And this is why more than half of the country and the people you all love and care about will be completely blindsided by what happens. And in the meantime, they'll think you're all idiots for feeling the way you do. And that's why you can only save the world one person at a time, starting with yourself, as far as I'm concerned.
Right. And we're all idiots for buying pet rocks.
Right.
I just wanted to bring this up. You mentioned this earlier today, too. So this is one of the articles here. China, of course, reducing their U.S. bond footprint and ramping up again gold purchases over and over again. That seems to be their trend. This was an interesting article on Zero Hedge from the 15, Andy. I want to talk to you about the incoming gold shortage that nobody is talking about. Alistair McLeod here had an interview with Liberty and Finance to discuss this. How do we get to there will be no gold for investors? What scenario plays out for us to get there, in your opinion, based on this interview here with Alistair?
Well, Alistair, first of all, I'm Dunnigan and I work very close together. He actually is a representative of mine. And Alistair is one of my most favorite analysts there is. He's a brilliant man. I didn't see this one, but I have an idea of what he was saying, because look, in any asset class, you will find that the very, very, very big knowledgeable investor front runs. The very, very big knowledge. I want you to think of like the central banks. The central banks if we go back to 2017, when no one was buying gold and it was falling, and the central banks had been selling for years, and you saw the Bundesbank and then the Austrian bank and Turkey and Hungary and Czech and Polish and the Dutch, all the national banks not only repatriated their gold, but then went on a 3-year buying spree that the world has never seen before in 2017, 18, and 19. And then 2019, the Bank of International Settlements, ironically, announces that gold is the only other tier 1 asset in the world. So all these banks said, give us back our gold, and then they start buying more than they've ever done in history. And it continues till today. But is there any coincidence that the BIS reclassified gold as the world's only other tier 1 reserve asset? No, they knew what was coming. The big money has the playbook. And so when we talk about a coming gold shortage, first of all, for the first time in a while, we see the commercial banks are on the long side of the COMEX, and they are positioned to ransack the managed money who has gone naked short. Very dumb thing to be in this environment. But if we just talk about the way the big money is doing things very, very quietly, we see 40 million ounces of gold taken off of COMEX in the last 3 years, very methodically. Last week, there was almost 900,000 ounces taken out of the registered category. I've never seen that much. Who the hell's got enough money to buy 900,000 ounces of gold? Think about that for a minute. Multiply 900,000 times 2,000, and where's that going? Who's got that kind of money? And so and not to mention, I showed you what's happening with silver on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. In terms of gold, gold is $80 higher on the Shanghai Gold Exchange right now. So the arbitrage is in place there as well. So what you are seeing is big money slowly and methodically, not doing it too fast to have the frog jump out of the boiling pot of water, but just fast enough to drain all of the exchanges, to drain the epicenters, to take it out of the ETFs. And it's a trickle down. I mean, where are all the coins coming from? Well, you buy the bars from places like COMEX or the LBMA, and then you turn them into coins. Well, if all of a sudden all of these epicenters of gold run out of product, then where do the mints get their gold to make the product? And at what point, when it starts to really take off, do these foreign mints nationalize their gold and say, whoa, gold just shot up by, Citibank says 3,000. Well, gold just popped up $1,000 and it's getting hard to get. We've decided as the Perth Mint, we're going to sell gold just to the folks in Australia. And well, the Rand Mint's going to say the same thing, and the Royal Canadian Mint. Yeah. And just like that, it happens. Now, there's no sign of that happening on the retail side right now. It's the opposite of that. But when you see it coming from the highest up of the high, that's exactly what he's saying. And I didn't even have to listen to it to know that's what he is saying. The biggest money in the world is using the ability to suppress the paper price by 35 times leverage on COMEX in contracts that distort reality to drain the system, and do it slowly enough to do a good job of it. So there will come a point when, where right now, 0.5% of this country owns any gold at all, where if that number went to 5%, that's a tenfold increase in investment demand at a period of time where it becomes obvious to everybody. Because if you look at the legendary investors, they all buy when no one else is buying. They buy when everyone's selling, when there's blood in the streets, always. Right. That's why there's only few legendary investors who have the nuts to do it, like Michael Burry. Everyone said, you are freaking nuts, man, shorting the subprime, and look how much money he made. Well, that's how you find people who are legendary investors became legendary. They bought when everyone said, you're a complete and total idiot. They're not followers. They are leaders of thought, and they listen to their own intuition rather than following the herd. But that's what's happening. The big money is draining the system, and by the time that the average Joe and Jane wakes up to the need for it, there's a high probability it'll be gone. And it's easy for me and Alistair to say that. Alistair is a spokesman for gold money, and I own a precious metals company. Well, we're talking our book, we're biased. No bullshit. It's logic, and either you accept it, that running a business and trying to do the right thing do not need to be mutually exclusive of one another. in
Well,
both of them.
you're not selling your book when you're saying things like this. We already know that 1,000 ton annual purchases for the 2 consecutive years does for gold, right? So he's saying the central banks are not likely to stop. We just showed the trend here. These are facts. This is not
Yes,
hyperbole. This is not selling your book. This is what's happening. The big players are taking the gold chips off the table, and that's what he's saying. At some point here, there's nothing left for the investors who are going to wake up to gold not being a pet rock here. That's that critical pivot point
correct,
we're getting to.
correct.
Really well said, Andy. Andy, we're almost done for the show today, man. It goes fast when you're here. I wanted to
I
share.
love being here, JC. There's no one like you, brother.
Let's talk about these, man. These are cool. They went out Kruger Hands. I love these at 59 over a spot. They went out Silver Britannias here, the 2023 at 315 over a spot, and a cool Valcambi Platinum bars. Are these popular?
And that's all true. And those are all decent specials. I just want everyone to know that everything's on sale. Everything is on sale. And it's the best time I've seen in my career to buy gold and silver. And I don't say that lightly, because not only are the prices on par, on level with where they've been most of my career, when you could hear the crickets chirping at noon, but the world is, in my opinion, far more scary than it's ever been. And I don't understand. This will go down to me, this period really since December to where we are right now, where it's almost like we're in the eye of the hurricane, where we really got walloped over the last few years by the front edge, and the trailing edge is coming. I'll never understand it. And but the big money is using this environment to drain the exchanges, to accumulate, and maybe they're that good at suppressing price with derivative contracts and rhetoric and goosing the equity markets and doing all of these things to make everyone think a soft landing is coming and blah blah blah. It's even worse when our own administration lies to us about inflation and unemployment. To the Federal Reserve has to say you're full of shit, where people aren't getting it. And then all of a sudden, by the time they do get it, to Alistair's point, there is a probability that a lot of people will be shut out or pay high premiums or have long delivery delays. We're a long ways away from that, it appears today, but how far away are we? $1 billion in this market, there'd be nothing left in the United States like that. I mean, it would wipe out the inventory.
And then you go to the conversation. And then you go to the conversation you've had with your father many times. When do you choose to not fill the order when you're seeing these prices go absolutely hyperbolic? Do you fill that order that completely empties your inventory, or do you put a sign on the door, no offer, right? So that's the other question here too. Like, will you be able to buy as reality hits the road here and people realize what's going on?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess only time will tell, but I do think you will see that. I mean, look, there's a lot of money out there, and really the really big money, well, most of them, that money is controlled by financial advisories. And one of the things that we have been seeing lately, JC, is the acquiescence of these financial advisors at the behest of the people who are running, whose money it is, who's saying, I demand you to go get some gold and silver. I spent an afternoon in the home of one of the wealthiest families in the United States last week, and it was eye-opening. And they live here in Florida. It was very, very, very eye-opening to listen to the conversation. And the whole family was there, and every one of them is like, telling their advisor, no, this is what we want to do. Now, I wasn't arguing, of course, but I think this is something we'll continue to see, because at some point people will have to wake up and say, I need to de-risk my, what I've worked my whole life to accumulate. And it's not always about, return of right now, to me, is just as, in fact, probably a whole lot more important.
Right, exactly. Hey, before we go, speaking of selling your book, a great question here. Any updates on your book? Or is there going to be a chapter on your Thanksgiving dinners and your wife kicking you under the table?
I'm writing it with Bill Holter, and Bill probably wants to kill me because I'm not good at writing. It's not only that I'm not good at writing. I mean, I'm my own worst enemy. Time management is the bane of my life right now. And so I am writing a little bit here and there. It's going to be the longest, it's going to take me longer than anyone has ever took to write a book before, or taken to write a book before, but it's coming. I'll put it to you this way. It's coming, Jake. And I'm proud of what I've written so far, but I still have 5 or 6 chapters more to go.
Okay.
And then
Do
I'll
you have a target date to when you guys want to launch?
20 and 30, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Okay.
I don't know. Probably next year,
Okay.
2025, or maybe by the end of this year. You know,
Okay.
I'm going to um I was supposed to take my family to Europe last year, and I had a kidney stone that nearly killed me. 2 surgeries later, and
Both hurt.
we had to cancel our trip. So I am going to Europe for 10 days or 2 weeks, in a few weeks.
Okay.
And I have every intention of, sitting at a cafe with a cigar and a bottle of wine and just writing. Well, we'll see how well that goes, but it's coming. It's coming anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, and I should talk about the Thanksgiving deal. Someone once told me people remember stories always more than they remember facts or figures. And I got some pretty good stories to tell about what has been a 34-year odyssey, and I should just have one chapter dedicated to stories of the road, call it, I guess.
Oh, I'm looking forward to reading those also. Andy, maybe we can invite Bill next week or the week after. Join us on this.
I would love to. In fact, I talked with Bill about this. Bill said he wants to start doing more shows. I said, I'll get you on some more. So
anytime.
Yeah, I can tell you right now, Bill, I know he'll say yes. So count us in, and I'll twist his arm until he says yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Andy. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here today. Don't forget to join us again here at 3 p.m. Eastern for the Beyond the News edition here. Lawfare is going to be the subject matter at 3 p.m. Eastern. All right. I love you, Andy. We'll see you again.
Love you too, brother. Everyone, stay well. Jake, God bless you, brother. See you guys.